So in the quiz, the syllabus would be up to this Byzantine agreement protocol. So this particular slide.
Yeah, we have started the recording now.
Yeah. Okay. So let me start with or continue from our discussion where we stopped yesterday. So yesterday we have seen that to ensure eventual liveness, what PBFT does, that PBFT ensures or PBFT considers that there is a single primary, and that primary is making the ordering of the messages, and then the backup replicas that we have, the backup agree on the total ordering that is being proposed by primary. So that way, the entire PBFT work. But the problem comes when there is a fault in the primary. So whenever the primary is faulty during that time, it hampers or it affects the liveness of the protocol. Now, to ensure eventual liveness, PBFT assumes a weak synchrony that we have seen in yesterday's class. So the weak synchrony basically says that we have an asymptotic upper bound on the message transmission delay. Well, so by considering that I have an asymptotic upper bound on the message transmission delay, then based on that particular assumption, I can put up a timeout, and based on that timeout, if you do not receive any message from the primary by that timeout, you can assume that the primary is faulty. Now, whenever the backup detect that the primary is faulty, then the backups collectively initiate this view change protocol. So let us look into this view change protocol. So what the view change does, that first the backup starts a timer whenever it receives a request from the primary and the timer is not already running. So this timer is stopped whenever the request is executed and restarted when some new request comes. So that way, whenever this timer expires, that basically means that you are waiting for a new request, but you are not receiving that new request from the primary. So that means you may say that, well, possibly there is certain problem at the primary side because of which the primary is not sending any further message. So at that point of time, the backup can initiate a view change protocol. Now, one thing you should keep in mind, you can also claim that, well, it might happen that clients are not generating any new transactions or clients are not generating any new message. That's why the primary is not sending any further message. So that's why I'm not receiving anything. That can also happen, but just to ensure that you have a kind of progress in the protocol and the backups can correctly detect the primary being faulty. So even if the clients are not sending any message to the primary periodically keep on sending certain heartbeat message to the backups saying that, hey, I am alive, but I am not getting any new message from the client. So that's why we don't need to have any kind of consensus. So that way, you can actually use this particular timer to somehow understand that the primary is faulty when the timer expires. With an assumption that you are in a weak synchrony network, that means every message has an asymptotic upper bound before which the backup should receive that message. Now, if the timer expires, then the backup starts a view change to move to the new view. That means from view V to the next view, view V+1. So this view change protocol works in this way. So these backups, they multicast the view change message. Now this view change message contains certain parameter. One is the number for the new view, the identity of the new view, that is V+1. Then a number n. So n is the sequence number of the last stable checkpoint S, which is known to K. So the last stable checkpoint means the last message that have been accepted or that have been processed by this particular backup. Well, so when a particular message has been processed by a backup, the backup considers that you have received the checkpoint at that point of time. Well, so n is the sequence number of that last table checkpoint. Well, so the message for which the consensus has been reached. Now, the C is the set of 2a plus 1 valid checkpoint messages corresponds to S. Now, whenever you have a kind of checkpoint, that means certain messages have been committed. That means you have 2a plus 1 valid messages that you have received against that particular checkpoint, or rather it is the commit message that you have received for that particular checkpoint. So you include that commit messages, which actually indicate that, well, you are not claiming something falsely. Rather, you have seen that, well, you have received 2a plus 1 checkpoint messages corresponds to a particular message. So this is important because, see, again, it might happen that, say, for example, this replica R1, it has received the 2a plus 1 commit messages for a message having identity 100. Well, but it might be the case for R3 that by that time, R3 has not received 2a plus 1 checkpoint. So R3 has not checkpointed, or R3 has not committed that particular message with sequence number 100. Now, if a view change occurs before changing the view or before moving from the current view to the new view, all the correct replicas should agree that, hey, all of us are in the same point. That means all of us have committed or checkpointed up to, say, message 100. And whenever we are moving to the new view, I should start from message 101. Well, so you need such kind of synchronization among the replicas. Now, to ensure or to provide such kind of synchronization among the replicas, they send this set of 2a plus 1 valid checkpoint messages along with the view change, so that if certain replica receives the view change message and they find out that, well, they are at an older state, that means, say, they have seen up to message 98 or 99 to be checkpointed or committed, so they can think that, well, that means that message 100 has also been committed, so I can mark message 100 as committed. Well, and then I have another parameter, or the view change message has another parameter P. So this P is a set containing another set PM for each request M that prepared at K with the sequence number higher than N. So what does it basically mean? It basically means that, say, there can be two set of messages. Well, one message that has already been committed, another message that is floating in the network. That means for those messages you have received the prepare or the prepare messages, but those messages has not been committed. Now, whenever you are doing a view change, so these two set C and P, one is for the checkpointed messages, that means the message that has already been committed, and P is for the messages for which you have received the prepare messages, but for them you have not yet committed or you have not yet reached the checkpoint. Right? So these two set of messages are included within view change message, so that whenever you are moving from an older view to a new view, then all the replicas are in the same page. They are synchronous among themselves. They collectively decide that, well, up to message 100 has been checkpointed. From message 101 onwards, I need to checkpoint them in the new view. So in the older view, that has not been checkpointed, but those messages are actually floating. So this is the information that is being broadcast in the view change message. Now, whenever a particular replica they receive 2a plus 1 different view change messages, because you remember that for PBFT the quorum is on 2a plus 1 messages. So that's why whenever you want to come to an agreement, then you need 2a plus 1 messages. So similarly in the view change, you also need 2a plus 1 view change messages. So whenever there is 2a plus 1 view change message that is received by the replicas, then the replica moves from view V to view V plus 1. Now, one important question comes here, that whenever you are moving from view V to view V plus 1, that means you need to elect or you need to select the next primary. Well, so for example, in this diagram, R1 was the primary for view V. So the second one, mistakenly, I have written it is R1, it should be R2. So this R2 is the primary in view v+1. So that means you need a selection of R2, or you need a kind of collective decision that R2 is going to be the primary in view v+1. So how you are going to do that? So for that, there are multiple ways people do it. The PBFT protocol as such doesn't mention anything about how the next primary is selected or how the next primary is selected. So different algorithm or different protocol does it different way. Say for example, this Hyperledger SHA-2, it uses PBFT where it uses a round robin mechanism to select a replica as a primary. Whereas in Hyperledger Fabric, it uses a leader election algorithm to elect one of the replica as primary. So that way, different system can use different mechanism to select the next primary, but some mechanism have been applied to select the next primary, and in that primary, the view v+1 is initiated. Now, once you have that information, that means you have received 2f+1 view change message, then the replica send the view change ACK. So whenever you are sending this view change ACK, again, you need to form a quorum on this view change ACK, and typically this view change ACK is sent to the newly elected primary or the newly selected primary, depending on the algorithm based on which the primary is selected or elected. So once that new primary received this view change ACK for the quorum, then the primary broadcast this new view message. So the new view message basically says that, well, you are moving from view v to view v+1. So then the entire protocol stack moves, protocol state moves from view v to view v+1, and in view v+1, you start on again sending the message. So this new primary starts collecting the messages from the client and make a ordering of that, propose it to the prepare message. So to the pre-prepare message, prepare and pre-prepare message. So this is the kind of broad idea behind the view change protocol, and the basic PBFT algorithm along with this view change protocol, they provide safety and eventual liveness guarantee. But you should remember that in PBFT, while safety considers a strong asynchronous system, the liveness considers a weak asynchronous system, because as we know from the FLP impossibility that you cannot reach to simultaneously to safety and liveness in a fully asynchronous system. Well, so that's why to ensure the liveness, this PBFT it makes an assumption on the synchronicity of the environment. So rather than considering a kind of a fully asynchronous system, it considers a weak asynchronous system, where we assume that we have an asymptotic upper bound on the delay of the message. So this is all about the PBFT protocol. So before I move to the next content, let me know if you have any doubt or need any clarification about this entire PBFT protocol. So tomorrow the quiz will be on this PBFT. PBFT means this Byzantine agreement protocols. Okay, this set of slides. So any query or any doubts? Otherwise, I will move to the next topic. Okay, fine. So let us move to the next topic, where we are going to learn about a few advanced consensus mechanism. So till now, what we have seen that we have seen the consensus protocols for the permissionless model. So in the permissionless model, we have seen that we have protocols like proof of work, proof of stake, proof of elapsed time, and so on. Whereas in the permission model or in a closed blockchain environment, we have seen the consensus protocol correspond to this Byzantine agreement protocols. Well, so typically, although we have learned about the CFT consensus, but as I have mentioned that typically CFT consensus is not used except for a few special cases, like to have the ordering service in Hyperledger Fabric, where it considers the CFT consensus and the Raft protocol. But for the general blockchain consensus in a closed environment, we use the Byzantine agreement protocols. Now, let us see that why this, or rather, neither the proof of work nor the PBFT actually suffices all our purpose, and we need to think of new and advanced consensus mechanism. So, for the last few years, there have been a plethora of research that have been devoted to design different kind of consensus mechanisms, which actually combines multiple argument together, multiple concept together, to reach to a kind of, or design a kind of efficient consensus mechanism for the blockchain. So first, let us look, or let us try to see that what is the need for designing such kind of advanced consensus mechanism, and then we look into a few, or rather three of the such interesting new consensus mechanism which were particularly designed for the blockchain applications, and we'll discuss their broad overview and see that how they perform in comparison with the vanilla proof of work or vanilla PBFT mechanism. So to start with, let us understand one of the important aspects of consensus, which we call as the consensus scalability. Well, so this particular diagram has been taken in one of the paper that was published by Marco Vucolic from IBM, that was published in 2015, which actually does kind of very interesting survey and very interesting analysis of different kind of consensus mechanisms which are particularly used in the context of blockchain. So whenever we are analyzing the consensus scalability, we analyze the consensus scalability from two different aspects. One is the node scalability. So this node scalability primarily defines that how many nodes your consensus mechanism can support. And the second aspect is the performance of the consensus mechanism. So the performance of the consensus mechanism actually indicates that what is the kind of transaction throughput that you can support. So in node scalability, I can have less than 20 nodes or even more than 1,000 nodes. So it really starts from a small network to a very large network. And we try to see that how these consensus protocols scale up with respect to the increasing number of nodes in your blockchain network. And the second aspect is the performance, to find out that what is the kind of transaction throughput that they support, and the kind of transaction latency or the transaction commitment time that they particularly support. So here, let us start with this standard proof of work mechanism. So if you just try to see the consensus of this standard proof of work protocol, that is for Bitcoin. Now for Bitcoin, you will see that it supports a very good node scalability. So it can really work on a large network. But the transaction throughput for Bitcoin is very low. Well, so it is typically less than 100 transactions per second. Well, and then actually there are multiple different optimizations that have been happened on this standard proof of work. We are going to talk about them. But on the other hand, if you look into the standard BFT protocols, so the standard BFT protocols are at the other extreme. Well, so that means they provide very good transaction throughput with block commitment time equivalent to the network latency. So they can support more than 10K transactions per second, but they mostly work good when your number of nodes is less than 20. Well, so this is the kind of interesting aspect that we have, that if I just try to analyze the scalability aspect of these two protocols, one that is used for or used in the permissionless model, and the other that is used in the permission model, they basically work in two different extremes. Well, in one extreme, they support large number of nodes, but with very low transaction throughput. Whereas in other extreme, it provides very good transaction throughput, but with very less number of nodes. So the entire optimization space that have been evolved around this blockchain consensus, that actually tries to make a optimization from these two fronts. So they basically try to increase the kind of transaction performance, whereas at the same time by increasing the number of nodes that it can support. So ideally, if you can have an algorithm in this space, then that provides the best node scalability, and that can provide at the simultaneously best transaction throughput. Well, so by 2015, when Vukolik had made this diagram, we didn't have any kind of protocol in this box, which actually supports that much of scalability. But later on, around 2018, 2019, there was a protocol called Algorand that had been proposed by Silvio Micali from MIT Media Lab. That particular protocol actually claimed to be having very good node scalability and at the same time very good transaction throughput. So we are going to look into Algorand in details in your course. But apart from that, we are also going to look into some optimizations in this front so that we understand that how gradually we have reached towards that idea of Algorand, which actually tries to scale up the entire architecture significantly. So if you try to look into this kind of optimizations that have been proposed by the people, so over the time, people have tried to understand these consensus algorithms from different fronts. On one hand, they have tried to optimize the standard BFT protocol, and on the other hand, they have tried to optimize the proof of work type of consensus mechanisms. Well, so from the BFT side, you already support very good transaction throughput. So what you need to do, you need to design a Byzantine agreement protocol that can actually increase the support of number of nodes. So from that perspective, these different protocols like XFT, which is called cross fault tolerant, which is actually a very interesting paper that you can look into. There are other optimizations like parallel BFT, optimized BFT, hybrid BFT. Well, and all these protocols actually they work in the BFT consensus domain, the Byzantine agreement domain, and they try to improve the consensus scalability from the perspective of supporting more number of nodes. On the other hand, if you try to look into this the standard proof of work mechanism, it actually, as I mentioned, that it supports a large number of nodes, but with a very low transaction throughput. So people have also tried to think of different optimizations on that front. That means improving the consensus scalability in terms of performance for this set of nodes. So such that this Bitcoin NG, there is another protocol called Biscoin. Well, so today we are going to look into this Bitcoin NG and Biscoin, these typical optimizations in the context of proof of work blockchain. And we basically try to see that, one of the interesting aspects that you can understand from this diagram, that if you want to reach to this particular box with a kind of consensus algorithm, what you have to do necessarily, you need to combine the best features from the Byzantine agreement protocols and the mining-based consensus mechanism or the Nakamoto consensus. Well, so you need a protocol that combines Byzantine agreement along with proof of work. So this is the kind of requirement which I have, and we'll see that how people have actually tried to combine all this together to design a kind of very interesting protocol in this front. So to continue further, if I just try to compare between this proof of work consensus and BFT consensus, you will see that in terms of node identity, proof of consensus works on an open environment, whereas this BFT consensus works on a permission or the closed environment. This proof of work, it doesn't support consensus finality, because as we have seen earlier that it provides more weightage to liveness compared to safety, whereas BFT consensus, the typical BFT consensus which actually provides more weightage to safety compared to liveness, they provide consensus finality. Now, if you look into the scalability in terms of number of nodes, proof of work consensus and excellent scalability, whereas the scalability for BFT consensus is limited. So most of the time it is less than 20 nodes. In terms of number of clients that can be supported, both are good because ultimately the clients are not participating in the consensus mechanism. Rather, clients are sending the messages to the proposers or to the primary, which are doing the ordering service. Well, now if you look into the performance in terms of throughput, then as well as latency, then for proof of work consensus, you have limited throughput and you have high latency. Well, whereas for BFT consensus, it is excellent. Well, power consumption perspective, it is very poor for proof of work consensus. We have discussed it earlier, that proof of work wastes a significant amount of energy, whereas it is good for the BFT consensus. Well, if you look into the adversarial attack, which can be possible, so in case of proof of work consensus, for the adversarial network, for the adversarial person, if they get less than equal to 25% of the computing power, they will not be able to make an attack on the system. Well, so if it is more than 25% of the computing power, then the idea is that if you gain more than 25% of the computing power, then you can actually start collecting other nodes and you can actually deceive the network from its general operations. Well, whereas in case of BFT consensus, we have seen that it is less than equal to 33% of the voting power. Okay, if that is the kind of power that an adversary has, then the adversary cannot make any kind of attack. So then the formal things that whether they provide any correctness proof or not. So that way we see that there is a kind of clear trade-off between the proof of work consensus and the BFT consensus. Now, with this trade-off, if we try to think of that, how can we design a scalable consensus mechanism? So the first idea that we are going to discuss today is called the Bitcoin engine. Well, so this particular paper have been published in NSTI 2016 and have received a lot of attentions in the blockchain community. So let us try to understand the broad overview or the broad idea behind Bitcoin engine. So if you just try to revisit the issues which I have with Nakamoto consensus, we'll see that all the source of all the problems are in two different fronts. One is the transaction scalability. That means your block frequency is around 10 minutes and block size of something initially it was 1 MB and then it got increased to 8 MB. It basically reduces the transactions that can be supported per second. Well, so you can generate only a single block at every 10 minutes with maximum 8 MB of block size. Well, and the second issue is with fork. This fork basically prevents the consensus finality and it also makes the system unfair. Well, so that basically means a miner with poor network connectivity has always in a disadvantageous position, because if you have a poor internet connectivity and if you do not hear the other blocks or if you do not be able to propagate your blocks further, it might happen that other miners have mined a new block that got added and you become a part of the fork. Right? So that way, fairness is a significant issue which comes along with forks. Now, the broad idea behind Bitcoin NG is that the way the Bitcoin NG actually tries to solve these two problems. So the first problem that we have seen earlier is that this particular block generation, it has a kind of time limit that at every 10 minutes, you can generate a kind of a single block, right? And from where the 10 minutes come, that why I need to wait for 10 minutes? Because this entire block generation is dependent on who is going to generate the block. Why? Because the miner who is going to generate, or the miner who is been able to generate the proof by solving the cryptographic hash problem that we discussed earlier, only that miner will be able to propose a new block. Well, and once you have proposed a new block, then for the next block, again another miner will be selected based on this new cryptographic hash problem. And that way, at every round, if you just think about this Nakamoto consensus in the form of rounds, you will see that at every round, we are basically electing one miner. Well, how we are electing one miner? We are saying that the miner who is been able to solve the puzzle, that is going to propose the new block. So that works like a leader and propose the new block. So I am using that puzzle solving problem or the puzzle solving challenge to elect a new miner at every round, and then that miner is going to propose exactly a single block. So that means the major source of problem comes from here, that the leader selection is coupled with block generation. Well, so to generate every block, you need to find out a miner, or you need to elect one miner. That miner will propose the block, and you are using that puzzle solving technique to elect a new miner. Now, what Bitcoin NG does, this Bitcoin NG actually identifies this source of problem, and it decouples these two things, the leader election and the transaction serialization. Well, so what it does, that it uses this proof of work, that means the Nakamoto consensus, to randomly select a leader, which is a kind of infrequent operation in Bitcoin NG. So that means once you have elected a leader, that means the leader who has been able to solve the puzzle, solve the cryptographic hash puzzle, and can generate a proof, that becomes the leader. And then that leader, rather than serializing a single block or proposing a single block, that leader can propose multiple blocks. Well, so that is the kind of core idea which is being proposed in Bitcoin NG. That rather than allowing every miner, or rather than allowing every leader who has been able to generate a proof, what you do, that rather than proposing a single block by that leader, let that leader propose multiple different blocks. So how it works? So if I just want to compare between Bitcoin and Bitcoin NG, so in Bitcoin, at around every 10 minutes, I have one leader. That leader proposes a single block. Well, now in case of Bitcoin NG, when a leader is selected, the leader actually proposes multiple different blocks. Now, out of these multiple different blocks, the first block that the leader proposes, which actually contains the proof of solving the puzzle, that particular block is called a key block. And after this key block, the leader can also propose multiple other blocks till the next leader is selected, and these blocks are called as the micro block. Well, so this micro block are basically connected with the key block with the same proof. So that basically means that whenever you are electing a leader, rather than waiting for this entire 10-minute duration, which was there in case of my standard Bitcoin, so within that time, the leader who has already been elected, the person who has already been generated a proof, let that person keep on generating multiple other micro blocks. Right. So that is the kind of core idea behind Bitcoin NG. Now, as I mentioned, that there are two different blocks. One is the key block and the second one is the micro block. Now, these key blocks are used to choose a leader, which is similar to Bitcoin. So this key block contains the reference to the previous block, the current Unix time, a Coinbase transaction to pay the reward to the miner, a target hash value, a nonce field, similar to the field that we typically see in case of a proof of work block. Now, these key blocks, they are generated based on regular Bitcoin mining procedure, as I have mentioned. So you find out the nonce such that the block hash is less than the target value. The same logic is basically applied here. And these key blocks are generated infrequently. Well, and the intervals between two key blocks are typically exponentially distributed. That Bitcoin NG tries to ensure. Now, the second type of blocks that I have is the micro block. Now, once a node generates a key block, it becomes the leader, and it keeps on generating the further micro blocks. these microblocks are generated at a rate which is much smaller than a predefined maximum. So this maximum is typically considered as the half of the key block, so that you can generate at least 2 microblocks in between 2 key blocks. And this rate is much higher than the key block generation rate. So if you generate a single key block at every 10 minutes, then you can possibly generate 20 number of microblocks in that 10 minutes. Now this microblock contains the ledger entries. That means the corresponding transactions and the transaction header, or rather a block header. So this block header contains a reference to the previous block, the current Unix timestamp for the miner who has mined this block, a cryptographic hash of the ledger entries, which is typically the Merkle root, and a cryptographic signature of the header. Now, this signature is actually interesting because here for every block I do not have a different miner. So in case of my typical Bitcoin blockchain or the proof of work blockchain, what we have seen that the miner signs the block with its own signature. But here, a single miner is proposing multiple different blocks or multiple different microblocks. So the signature that is being used for the key block, the same signature is used in the microblock, okay, to indicate that, well, these microblocks are corresponds to this particular key. Now, one of the major problem that can happen in case of Bitcoin NG is that, well, we can possibly avoid key block fork because this duration between 2 key blocks is significantly higher. We can keep it significantly higher so that every miner is guaranteed to hard the key block, well, or at least there is a high probability that we will hear the key block. But for the microblock, because they are generated very frequently, so there can be a possibility of forking at the microblock level. So how it happens? Say when a miner generates a key block, it might not have heard of all the microblocks that have been generated by the previous leader. So it might happen that I am a leader currently, I am generating the microblock, and by that time you have proposed a new key block, and you have not heard the latest microblocks that have been proposed by me. Now, that way, these microblocks becomes forked microblocks. So a node may hear a forked microblock, but not the new key block. So that things might happen. Now, to ensure that, what we do that we ensure, or the Bitcoin NG tries to ensure that every node who are participating in the Bitcoin NG blockchain, they receive the key blocks within time. Well, so that basically means that when a node sees a microblock, it waits for some amount of time before adding that microblock in its chain. So what it does that it typically waits for the propagation time of the network to make sure that this microblocks has not been pruned by the new key block. Well, so that way we try to reduce the microblock fork. But in Bitcoin NG, you cannot avoid microblock fork completely. Again, it is a way to reduce the possibility of microblock fork, but microblock fork can still happen. Well, so this is actually one of the kind of limitations for Bitcoin NG. Now, if you just try to look into the performance of Bitcoin NG, I have shown from the paper the consensus latency and the fairness. So this lower line, this particular line corresponds to this Bitcoin NG, and this upper dotted line, it is corresponds to the standard Bitcoin. So what is actually happening here? You can see that, well, Bitcoin NG is able to reduce the latency compared to the standard Bitcoin. Now, if you just, another important aspect, if you just try to see, or if you try to understand the fairness between the two protocols, you will see that, well, Bitcoin NG is significantly fair compared to the standard proof of work consensus. Well, so this fairness comes from the fact that these key blocks are generated very infrequently, and because the key blocks are generated very infrequently, that way we do not have a kind of or we can expect a kind of reduced conflict in terms of key block form. So this is broadly the kind of, again, a kind of very broad idea or a kind of very bird's eye view of Bitcoin NG, which actually tries to do optimizations on top of Bitcoin by proposing this key block and the micro block, and separating out the leader election from the transaction serializability. That is the kind of core concept behind this Bitcoin NG. So next we are going to see another enhancement or another upgradation of the consensus algorithms. But before going to that, let me know if you have any query from the design of Bitcoin NG. So any query or anything that you want me to mention further? Okay. So if not, then let us move to the next consensus mechanism, which is proposed in Using Security Symposium in 2016, in the same year when Bitcoin NG was proposed. So Bitcoin NG proposed at the beginning of the year, and this Bitcoin that got proposed at the end of the year, the same year. But this Bitcoin paper, it actually considers a very interesting primitive that is actually widely used in many of the blockchain construct, rather in permission blockchain construct, which is called a collective signing or co-sign. Well, so what we are going to do here, we are first going to look into this idea of collective signing or the co-sign, and then we will see that how we can utilize this collective signing or co-sign to further improve the consensus performance compared to Bitcoin NG. So let us try to see this idea of collective signing. The collective signing paper that got published in the same year in 2016 in IEEE Symposiums on Security and Privacy. So the title of the paper is pretty interesting, Keeping Authorities Honest or Bust with Decentralized Witness Co-signing. So what collective signing tries to do, it is a kind of method to protect authorities and their clients from undetected misuse or exploits. Well, so what is the core idea? So the core idea is that, say, whenever you are going to apply a digital signature, what you are doing, so you are basically relying on the person who has signed the message. Well, now what happens if that person itself is corrupted? So it might happen that I am a corrupted person, but I still sign the message. Well, so that is natural. If you just try to map this problem with the typical problem that we have in our society, such kind of things keep on happening, right? That it is not like that the corrupted people doesn't sign anywhere. So they keep on signing on the wrong document. Right? So that way, what might happen that a corrupted person or a corrupted node may put the digital signature on the wrong document. But what we believe or what we see that, well, if I can take the signature from multiple people from the society, so rather than taking the signature from a single person, if we take the signature from multiple different persons altogether, so then I can reduce the possibility of corruption. Why? Because, well, one person or two person in a society may be corrupted, but it is very unlikely that majority of the persons in a society are corrupted. Well, so if majority of the persons in a society are corrupted, then the society cannot run. Well, and interestingly, you always remember that this is the kind of very primitive idea behind the entire blockchain concept. Well, and as I mentioned that later on, we are also going to discuss about Algorand. And in Algorand, we will also see that it relies on this kind of principle that, well, majority of the people in a society are good people. Well, if the majority becomes bad, then the society cannot run anymore. Well, so with this particular principle, collective signing also works. That, well, if you are taking a signature from majority of the stakeholder, if you are going to collectively take the signature from majority of the stakeholder, then you can ensure that, well, the message or the information that is being generated from this collection of signatures that message is good. Well, so this collection of signature, it is termed as witness co-signing. Okay. So what is meant by witness co-signing? So it is something like that. It happens in case of, say, for example, in case of marriage registry. I have the witness. So whenever you have the legal deed, I have multiple witnesses. Well, and why we typically put the witness in case of those legal deeds? Because we want to make sure that, well, although two persons are agreeing on something, but there are other witnesses who are actually collectively signing there. Now, if those or any of those parties deny that, hey, this is not my signature have been fraudulent and someone else have signed on behalf of me, then you have the witness to prove that, well, it is not like that. You have signed in front of me, so I guarantee that you have signed that document. So this particular thing is called a witness co-signing. So in the digital domain, this particular idea, the collective signing, it tried to design this method for witness co-signing, which ensures that every authoritative statement is validated and publicly logged by a diverse group of witnesses before any client accepting. Well, so this diverse group of witnesses, that is another important keyword here. Well, so you should ensure that, well, the different statement that you are going to issue, the different statements are signed by different witnesses. Why that is so? Again, to prevent colluding the environment. So if there is an attacker and if the same person, same set of witnesses signing every document, then it might happen that the attackers collude with the witness and the witness starts signing on the wrong document. Right? So here in case of collective signing, any statement case that is collectively signed by W witnesses, it assures the client that S has been seen and not immediately found erroneous by those W observers. Well, so rather, what you are doing here, that rather than relying on a single person who is signing the statement, you are relying on a collective of signatures, which collectively tells you that, well, this particular statement is correct. Now, this is the kind of entire COSI architecture. The way it works in the context of blockchain, we will discuss that in details later on. That the leader, it organizes the witnesses in a tree structure. So why we go for a tree structure? Because we will see later on that a tree structure provides a better way of getting these multiple signatures and collecting these multiple signatures. So it is a kind of scalable way of aggregating the signatures coming from multiple different nodes. So finally, whenever you are signing the document, you need to sign the document with multiple different signatures. Now, we'll also see later on that 3 rounds of PBFT, that is the PPPR, PPR, and the commit phases of PBFT that we have seen earlier, that can be simulated using 2 COSI rounds. So this is actually one of the very interesting primitives that is used to scale up the consensus mechanism for PBFT or the Byzantine agreement protocols by utilizing this COSI primitive. So the basic COSI architecture, the basic COSI protocol, it uses an idea which is called Schnorr multisignature. So remember that whenever we are generating any kind of multi-signature, my requirement is that although the document is getting signed by multiple different persons, say a document that you are going to get signed, and this is signed by multiple different persons together, but while you are, and by signing this document by multiple different persons together, you are finally getting or receiving a single signature, say S. Now, you need to keep in mind that the single signature S should be verifiable very efficiently. Well, so the verifier who is going to verify that single signature S, the verifier should not just sit with some 10 different public keys and try to decode the message repeatedly with 10 different public keys to find out the final verification of the signature. Well, so that means I need to have a kind of scalable way for verification of the signature. Now, for this verification of the signature, it uses this NOR multi-signature. This NOR multi-signature, it rely on a group G of prime order. Why we use a group G of prime order? Because this discrete logarithmic problem is believed to be hard. Well, so what is discrete logarithmic problem? Say you have say a message S. Now you find out a random number M. Say after getting this random number M, say S to the power M becomes Y. Well, now it says that, well, if you transfer S and Y together, then from S and Y, it is difficult to find out M. Well, basically M works like a key. So that means if you are going to send the message which is S and the message digest which is Y, then it will be difficult to find out the key that have been used to produce this digest. So this is basically my discrete logarithmic problem. Now, it is not like that the discrete logarithmic problem is always difficult, but on a group G of prime order, this discrete logarithmic problem is believed to be difficult. Now let us see that how we can generate the key. So let G be a group of prime order R and small g be a generator of G. Then we select a random integer X in the interval 0 to R minus 1. X is the private key and Gx is the public key. Well, so for every signer who is going to sign, they basically select this random integer X within the interval 0 to R minus 1. And X becomes the private key and G to the power X becomes the public key. Now the n signers, they have the individual private keys as x1, x2, xn. They have the corresponding public keys as g of x1, g to the power x2, g to the power xn, and so on. Now, whenever I'm signing the document, the signing works in this way, that each signer, they picks up a random secret vi and generates this capital Vi, which is equal to g to the power Vi. And after that, the leader, that means who is going to create the collective signature. So the idea is here. So I have a leader and I have multiple other witnesses. So the leader is going to collect the individual information from the witnesses and the leader is going to find out the final signature. Okay. So how it works that every individuals, they basically compute this g to the power Vi. Well, and then the leader collects all such capital Vi and aggregates them to find out the product of capital Vi. Well, and then it uses a hash function to compute a collective challenge C, which is h of V appended your statement. So this is the kind of statement that you want to sign. So this challenge is forwarded to all the signers. So that means the leader is collecting this g to the power Vi. Well, so this individual g to the power Vi is collected from the leaders. So once you have collected this g to the power Vi, so the leader actually computes this product of Vi, well, which is equal to V, and then it creates a challenge C from this product, well, by finding out a hash, and this challenge is sent to the individual nodes, well, who are the witnesses. Now these signers, they send the response Ri equal to Vi minus C of Xi. Well, so Vi was the random secret that they have used. Xi is the private key that they have, and C is the challenge that it has received from the leader. Well, then the leader gets all this Ri, and after getting all this Ri, the leader again aggregate them as sum of Ri. Now finally my signature becomes C and R. The challenge that have been sent, along with that, this summation of Ri, that means that individual Ri that was computed by the individual witnesses. Now that way the signature is being computed, and once the signature is computed, then the verification is straightforward. So how the verification is being done, that for doing the verification, I have that verification key, which is product of all the public keys. So you remember that b to the power xi is the public key for node I. Well, now I get a product of g to the power xi, and this product works like my final verification key. So that is the thing I was mentioning earlier, that although the message has been collectively signed by multiple people, but whenever you are going to verify it, you should not verify it with those individual g to the power xi's for individual lines. So you should have a kind of collective signature. So this is the kind of collective signature which is the product of all those individual signatures. Well, and we have seen that the signature is CR, well, where C was this hash of VS and R was the summation of R of RI. So the verification, for doing the verification, you compute V subscript V, which is equal to G to the power R Y to the power C. Well, so Y is product of G of Xi. Then let RV equal to H of hash of this VV that you have received along with the statement that you want to sign. Now, if RV is equal to the R that you have received along with the signature, then the signature is verified. Okay, and how we can prove that these things? So this is my verification key that we have seen earlier. Well, CR is my signature, where C is hash of V plus S or V appended S, and R is the summation of R of ROI. Now I was computing VV, which is equal to G to the power R, Y to the power C. What is R? R is my sum of VI minus C of Xi, right? That we have done during the signature generation. So RI was equal to VI minus C of Xi. So that way, I put the value of R here. Well, and what is Y? Y is equal to product of G to the power Xi. Well, so Y to the power C means product of G to the power CXi. Now, what is product of G to the power CXi? The product of G to the power 6 CXi is equal to G to the power sum of CXi. Well, so it is something like G to the power CX1 into G to the power CX2. That becomes equal to G to the power CX1 plus G to the power CX2. Well, so the same thing I apply here. Well, now if you try to compute it, then it comes to be G to the power sum of Vi. Well, so G to the power sum of Vi is again equivalent to product of G to the power Vi. Now G to the power Vi was my equal to my Vi, capital Vi. Again, we have seen earlier that product of Vi is equal to V. So that way, whenever you are computing RV, if the signature is valid, that means this VV, it is equal to V. Well, so whenever you are computing this hash, these two hashes should come to be equal. Well, so this way you can actually verify this NOR multi-signature. So what NOR multi-signature is doing, it is providing you a way that well you can get it signed by multiple different signers, but finally you get a single signature that can be verified by a single verification key, which is the product of the individual public keys. Well, so that way, although multiple people are signing it individually and you are combining the signature, but that combined signature can be verified directly by this combined key. So this is the idea of SNOR multi-signature, and in the next Wednesday class, we are going to look into that how we can use this SNOR multi-signature in case of the COSI protocol, and then we'll see that how we can apply COSI for having this a consensus algorithm which is much more scalable. So any query or any doubt for the topic that we have covered today? So if not, then let us close the class for today. Thank you all for attending. So we are going to meet tomorrow with the quiz followed by the tutorial, and tomorrow we are going to start with Hyperledger Fabric as a part of the tutorial. So thank you all. See you tomorrow. Take care. Bye.